I think you go for it, Matamon. Oh, Lyle, would you like to open us with a karakia? You're just on mute at the moment.
I'm sure someone else who's there in the flesh can do it, Jim.
Okay.
Ka timata i te tātātou hui. To demark that we are heading into the space of the sui. Tēnā rā tātou ia ki te tuiana, ki katuhia ki te tuhiarangi, ka tupu iho, ko ngā pūna weu, ngā pūkina ngā wānanga ngā tauira. A ko tēnei te kimino o te rapu noa ki te taketake I haru mai I ngā rangitu haha, uhi wero tau mai te mauri haumi e hui e, tā ki e.
Well, thank you, Toy. So apologies, we have Councillor Thompson and Councillor Campbell will be arriving late, and as will Councillor White. And any further apologies?
Apology for early departure. I've got our presentation to Western Bay at 12:30.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a mover and seconder for the apologies, please? Councillor Scott and Nees. And on Zoom, we have Councillor Campbell, Councillor Thurston and Councillor Winters. Right, so public forum, there is no public forum. Items on the agenda, there are none. Order of business, no change. Any declaration of conflicts of interest?
Yes, Chair, plan change 11. I'm involved in Rotorua Airport still, and they made a submission to plan change 11. So just to declare.
Public excluded business to be transferred into the open. Sorry, business. Yeah, there is none. Okay, so now we're on to confirming the minutes, and we also have the public excluded minutes. So if there are no corrections to those, then we can move them at the same time and move it all into the open, and then we don't have to go into public excluded at the end. So are there any corrections to the public excluded minutes? No. And the minutes? Okay, so can I have a mover and seconder for both of those? Please. Great, so that's the basic admin over and done with. So a very warm welcome to Helen and Richard this morning from the Cancer Society, and you're going to be presenting to us about the Bay of Plenty Accommodation Project, and the floor is yours. Nau mai haere mai.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for having us this morning. Ko Helen Carter toku ingoa. And I was going to introduce Richard, but I don't believe you need any introductions. Richard Cashmore, who is our patron for our Tauranga Accommodation Project. Thank you so much for having us. To Madam Chair McMillan and Chairman Leader and all the councillors, it's an absolute privilege to present to you a vision that we have for our Bay of Plenty communities. I would love to be able to take about 10 minutes just to overview our project and bring a few new pieces of information to you, and reserving a healthy 10 minutes for you to put us under our paces and ask any questions. That's okay? Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Righto. So I thought it would be handy to really start with an opportunity to connect us all. Just wondering if you might raise your hands if you've had an experience with cancer or know a very close loved one with cancer. Right, I think we have 1 out of 1, which is a higher ratio than New Zealand in itself. So we have a vision and a plan to build something that's quite transformational for cancer patients in the Bay of Plenty, which we have all been affected. We know that the stats in New Zealand are not heading in the right direction. Beyond what you read on the screen, which is 1 in 3 New Zealanders will be faced with cancer, that number is set to double by 2040. So that's 1 in 2 New Zealanders impacted by cancer. Currently, that means 3 New Zealanders every hour. There are inequities in every stage across the cancer continuum, and we're here to provide some solutions with you to make a difference. But we must act now. You may know that Cancer Society is the only organisation that supports all people with all types of cancer. Cancer definitely affects the individual, but also the whole whānau. We coin a phrase that cancer is a diagnosis for two. When families are impacted by cancer, over 60% of the people that have cancer stop working, and a further nearly 40% of caregivers or loved ones who are looking after them also have to stop working just to support that person to go through that journey. And what we're going to discover is some of that is very practical needs like transport. Families struggle to maintain income, livelihoods. It's not hard to imagine the ripple effect is beyond just the disease and the treatment. In particular, is cancer patients who go through radiation therapy. That's at least half of all cancer patients. They will need to travel into Tauranga across the Bay of Plenty once a day, every day, 5 days a week for up to 4 to 6 weeks as a treatment stint. What we do is we provide care in all the gaps. So there is the medical treatment, the diagnosis specialist and the pathways there. Cancer Society wraps around to solve all the other needs that a person and their whānau would have. Very practically, whether it's transport, getting you to treatment and back again, often through our very friendly volunteers, and we have a lot of them here locally, amazing members of our community. Whether it's providing a home away from home, so you rest, recuperate, restore while going through treatment. We have that in Hamilton for Waikato. Whether it's through our cancer care teams that are on the ground here in the Bay of Plenty, in home, journeying alongside people, or a 24/7 helpline. We are here and we have been here for a long time. Across the Bay of Plenty, if we really zoom down into a region that's close to your hearts and everyone in the room, approximately 2,400 are diagnosed with cancer every year. That number is growing. We estimate at least 90%, up to 95% of people diagnosed with cancer in the Bay of Plenty district are treated in Tauranga. If you're diagnosed and you are based in Rotorua, you'll be treated either in Waikato or in Tauranga. But either way, it's a long haul to get to your destination for treatment. But for the Bay of Plenty district, we need to help people because they are treated right here. We are already on the ground, no doubt about that. And this is just letting you know what we do already. Across the Bay of Plenty region, we meet the needs of over 800 patients. We provide thousands of bed nights at our Hamilton Lodge. We provide nearly 2,000 drives every year, covering nearly 45,000 kilometres, getting people to treatment, having a friendly face, drop off, door to door. We do other practical things like frozen meals, massages, anything to make life a little bit easier when you're feeling really quite miserable. And then we also bring people together for essential peer-to-peer support. That is all donor supported, funded. It is your friends, your family, your businesses and your local community that keeps us going. The main point to come down to a really practical problem we have for the Bay of Plenty is travel distance. I would actually just say travel time. I think that gets out of control quite quickly. Global research shows that if you live more than half an hour away from your treatment centre, it negatively impacts your ability to access healthcare services and likelihood of getting there. Patients skip or they miss appointments just due to delays in travel time and travel cost. From a clinical perspective, uninterrupted treatment improves outcomes. If you can stay near a radiation centre, you're more likely to stay on course with your treatment, improving your ability and your survivorship and your your quality of life. Cancer outcomes improve with such a practical solution, like a place to stay where you're loved and cared for and supported. There are economic benefits as well. When you provide high quality and accessible accommodation, you reduce the burden on caregivers. They might not have to give up work. They can keep going. They may not need to transport their loved ones on a day-to-day basis. We've recently read a study out of Australia that shows a $9 to 1 return by providing a simple solution like accommodation for cancer patients in a community. From a presentation point of view, the main thing I really do want to share with you this morning is stories. What we see and what we experience on a day-to-day basis. Stories from rural communities are very, very common, obviously. People who can't afford petrol, don't have public transport options, miss treatments when their impromptu friends or connections might fall through to get them to transport to treatment. Here's a case study. There's a lovely couple from Kawerau. They're in their 80s. We know them, they have multiple cancers. A lovely lady there was diagnosed with throat cancer, had to have treatment in Tauranga. She was able to stay in a motel 5 days a week for weeks on end. She was alone. Her husband, if he could, travelled in every day just to get her to the hospital. They faced difficulty with parking and traffic. They had lots of follow-up appointments. So even after going home, you've got to come back in every day for your specialist speech language therapists, all based in Tauranga. Her lovely husband has now been diagnosed with bowel and bladder cancer. His support person is his wife, who cannot drive him. They can't just pop into Whakatane. The treatment is not available for his particular cancer there. He needs to come into the Tauranga city. He needs intense radiation, followed by scans and surgery, all done in Tauranga. He's got to somehow get here if he wants to stay on track with treatment. Our other case study is a young mum family in Te Puke. Not too far, you would think, but she's faced with day-to-day radiation. Dad needs to keep his job, get his wife to treatment every day, get the kids to school, do the logistics, do the sport, do the packing of the lunches, do the groceries, and she's exhausted. If she had a safe place to stay, it would make life so much easier for that whānau. It's not just distance that can be a problem and get in the way with staying on track with treatment and with families continuing to maintain their livelihoods. It's also other side effects. We meet patients that might have limited digital skills. They can't understand appointment changes, instructions. If they were close to their centre, we could look after them. We have met an elderly person who is living alone, recovering from a stroke, facing memory challenges and speech impediments, coordinating their healthcare journey by themselves from their home is infinitely difficult. Lastly, we come across people with severe anxiety. When compounded with financial hardship, they are often forced to resign from their jobs and are socially isolated. If they had a stable, supportive environment near treatment, they could stay on track. They could come out stronger and we could get them back on their feet. So that brings me to my point. We have a mighty vision. We need to do it together. It's to provide a lodge in Tauranga to meet the needs of all our whānau across the Bay of Plenty that are faced with cancer. It provides a sanctuary, a soft place to land, a nurturing environment where meals and massage and social and nurses and all good things are provided for you free of charge. This is a mighty project. We have our eyes on land. We have our eyes on a construction cost that knocks around $20 million, but it's a non-negotiable for us. We're a charity. We've got lots of experience. We've been saving hard, and we're looking for people to help us make this happen for your community. There are very few silver bullets in the world of cancer, but I can name one, and a very practical solution, such as a place to stay, has far-reaching social and economic benefits for the Bay of Plenty. To be honest, it's just a no-brainer. So wrapping up, Our proposed lodge is a transformational project for our communities, not just for today, but for generations to come. So we'd love to have a conversation with you around joining us in this project for our communities. And we thank you in advance for your consideration. Kept on time.
Well done. Thank you so much. And it's always quite hard kicking off the day with something as emotive as that. And thank you for highlighting all of the challenges there and for the work you do. Open to questions. Councillor Von Daddelson.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. Very good. Can you, when we looked at that last picture, how many rooms are you looking at for accommodation?
What we have modelled is a minimum requirement for us is a 20-bedroom facility, but that would be used straight away. So we actually have a dream. Our vision is for a 40-bedroom facility to make sure we meet the growing needs of the community. And we have an opportunity then, what we do in Hamilton, we can take in people, it's not just cancer. If you've got to stay with a loved one who's in surgery, we can look after you as well. So we're looking to future-proof with a 40-bedroom facility.
Councillor Scott.
Look, thank you for that. I was on the DHB when the Catherine Kilgour Centre was funded, and we were pretty sure about the budget because we knew exactly how many of people from Bay of Plenty went to Hamilton for treatment. The budget blew out once it opened because there were people who couldn't get to Hamilton who are now able to be treated in Tauranga. So it's clear that access is a big issue. But then the next question is, what response have you had from Health New Zealand? Because this is clearly in their lane. And they would argue that there's priorities and things like that, I'm guessing, which I suppose is the same sort of decision we'll have. But have you had a good response from them? What's the situation?
Health New Zealand agree that there is a need. They know that health outcomes would benefit. We do this already in the Waikato. Their response to accommodation or non-clinical delivery is their support for the patients who have to travel. If you are out of town, you attract a $140 a night subsidy, which flows through to us. Imagine trying to find a motel in Tauranga during AIMS games for $140 a night. So that is the support from Health New Zealand comes with the guests who stay, not in terms of a capital build.
I just make a comment, the clearly in somebody else's lane is so easy to bring up. I asked Sir Paul Adams to approach Quayside because he has a close association with them, and Mr. Paul's actually had cancer himself as well. And the answer we got, well, that's actually in the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's lane. So it's easy for the buck to be passed. And what we're asking is, this is a Bay of Plenty project. There can't be another project that the people need as much as they need to, as we need to look after the whānau with cancer. The only thing you could be assured of is it's going to be more of it tomorrow. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we going to stand up and do something about this, or are we going to try and pass it on to somebody else?
So Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the presentation. I don't think anybody I could think of would argue against the importance, the social importance and significance of the proposal. The issue is merely how can it be funded, I think, is the bottom line. My question is, how's the Waikato facility funded?
So in terms of when it was originally built or ongoing? So when it was originally built, like what we're doing here today, it was a community-driven effort. So local funders across the community all came together to build the Hamilton Lodge, which has been in service for 12 years now. We do 16,000 bed nights a year. From an ongoing perspective, everybody who stays with us, as I mentioned, attracts a accommodation supplement or support from the government, which passes through to us. So we run a very, very tight ship where that accommodation supplement keeps us going from an operational perspective, and we fundraise over and above with amazing community support to do improvements that we want to make or to improve the service that we offer. So it's a mixed model. It has always been by the community for the community. And then we, as I said, we accept the government subsidy to keep us going on a day-to-day basis.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on this project and, you know, really wish you all the best in your funding activities. Can you tell me who else in both nationally and regionally and locally you've applied to for funding, and what sort of funding you're applying for?
We've spoken to Horizon, very, very good reception from them. They have certain restraints as to where they can lend regionally, but they're working to overcome that. We've spoken to the Rotorua Electricity Trust, to Bay Trust, to Quayside, sorry, not to Quay, well, yes, to Quayside, to TECT. Good response from TECT, good response from regional.
Trust Horizon.
Trust Horizon. Bay Trust, limited response. Rotorua, not a strong response.
Trust Horizon is talking to us up to $4 million, and we're looking for parties to match them. When it comes to building something like this, a big capital build, you need 3, maximum of 4 cornerstone or foundational partners. And then you bridge the rest of the capital gap with philanthropists, with fundraising, with business and with partnerships. But in order to continue with what we've felt is momentum and success, we're looking for those 3 to 4 cornerstone partners that get us at least over 50% of the funding requirements. That's how it works and how it's successful. Yep.
So New Zealand Lotteries, they've got a major fund for capital builds.
Yes, correct. We will grant applications as a key funding partnership for us. They are more successful when you have your cornerstone partners in place.
Thank you. Oh, we wish you all the best.
Councillor, Chairman Leader.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Richard. Look, I mean, this is an admirable project, and I don't think anyone would disagree. Similar to Councillor Scott, having been on the DHB's specialisation in terms of people having to travel to a particular skill centre does have good outcomes in terms of survivability. And that's just a function of the issue you're trying to address now, and how do people get to specialisation certificate. This is similar to me in terms of the current debate that seems to be taking place regarding hospice care, which I think is equally challenged in terms of getting funds as well. So that's the first issue. The second issue is, as with, you probably don't realise, but local government is process driven. And I suppose from this point onwards, I'll defer to Namuta here, because there's 2 tranches that you can pursue. One would be submission to the annual plan, and the other would be a submission to the LTP. When's that next one due? The LTP's 3 years away, 2 years away?
2 years away.
2 years away. So those are the tranches in terms of getting further consideration for this. As a council, just can't make an ad hoc decision in terms of doing this. But look, as I said, I think the project is admirable. As Councillor Nees said, wish you well in terms of ensuring, hoping that you can secure the capital to make sure this thing happens. Because you're right, it's people from Te Kaha, people from Whakatane.
You could
they've
not
all got to
find
come here for
health
treatment.
crisis. As as Richard mentioned, there's only a growth pathway here, unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons. So you could not find a health status as New Zealand's largest killer that has more social and economic implications on the Bay of Plenty region. You have extreme difficulties across the Bay of Plenty region because you do get rural very, very fast. The complexities, inequities and postcode lottery challenges that you face are quite substantive. So I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think it's something that impacts us all and we need to make that difference.
Have Councillor Thurston online with a question.
Yeah, thanks so much for your presentation. Like Councillor Scott, I've had a lifetime in health and health politics and National Health Committee and regional health authorities and whatever, but I reside in Rotorua and I was on the Energy Charitable Trust at the time that substantial funding was committed to the Lions Hostel in Hamilton, and that was to enable Rotorua people in particular to have free access to that facility. Yes. So I think that will be one reason that you could be getting a bit of pushback from the Rotorua Energy Charitable Trust. I'm no longer on it and I can't speak for them, but that was substantial funding, and I think there's even a wing from memory attributed to the Rotorua Energy Charitable Trust in Hamilton. But no, I wish you all the very, very best. Rotorua has a unique association, as you know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, with Waikato Hospital, and it's very much treated as the first cab off the rank, anyone requiring treatment at Waikato from Rotorua. So if you could just comment briefly on the stats as they pertain to Rotorua and the catchment that you intend to pull from Rotorua. Will they bypass the Lions Hostel in Hamilton, or will that still be a major direction for referrals?
I can talk to the patient pathway. That's absolutely right. There's two pathways from the Rotorua for anybody with prostate cancer, which men, they are all treated in Tauranga. That's the patient pathway. For people with alternative cancers, they are treated in Waikato, and that's a decision made by Health New Zealand. So there's no swapsies that go on. That is just the method that Health New Zealand have for their patient flows. What that means for men in Rotorua is that they will need to travel into Tauranga, and they do every day, for radiation. And that's weeks on end unless they can find accommodation in Tauranga. And that's question mark affordability, question mark loneliness, question mark you eating well, question mark can you get to your treatment. All the challenges that come and who gets you there. I know people in Rotorua that can't afford, there's no public transport. So this is really important for all the men in Rotorua to have somewhere to stay. I couldn't stress it enough. It's definitely it's not a wish, it's an absolute must have for the community.
No,
Councillor White? Oh, sorry. Go, Lyle.
No, just thank you. But the other comment I'll make from my lifetime in health politics, one of the most expensive services to deliver, as you will know, is inpatient hospice facilities. They're incredibly expensive to be funded. And I know Councillor Scott will back me up there, but no, seriously, I wish you all the very best in your endeavours. No, full marks to you. Thanks so much.
Councillor White.
Yes, apologies, Madam Chair, for lateness, and apologies I missed your first part of your presentation. I empathise very strongly with you in this kaupapa. You know, I lost my darling over the last 12 months to cancer, 25-year fight in cancer. So I can empathise with the challenges and the difficulties. Many people around this table here will probably have family members who have been hit with cancer. So emotively, very, very strong support. And, you know, all I can really say is I wish you well. I mean, it's a matter to be considered further around this table, but I wish you well, because I've personally been through the plight of having to work with cancer, deal with cancer, and the logistics of care and cancer and travel and everything else. So it's very familiar territory and very raw still. So I wish you well.
Great. Well, you can see the level of empathy around the table for your cause. And certainly, you know, from what you've said in your presentation, highlighting how not only the inequities of geographical isolation, but also how people might not make the treatment they need if there are too many barriers in front of them, and therefore their outcomes, even, you know, whether they're going to survive or not, are dependent on these barriers being lifted from them. And I think you've made that really clear and highlighted that to us. And I know certainly from my years in the Heart Foundation and working alongside you as partners, that is always a challenge of what barriers are in the way to prevent people from getting the treatment they need and the ongoing treatment. So the chairman did outline the process here. So we have a third-party infrastructure funding that is currently on hold through this LTP process, but the LTP, the long-term plan process, is where you can make an application through our third-party infrastructure fund, and there are a whole load of criteria that go with that, you know, things like business case, etc. So I'll leave that in your hands, but just wanted to reiterate thanking you for coming in today. And the great thing is this is on live stream, so any of your supporters can go on and watch that. It will be recorded, it will be on YouTube, so they can see some of the questions that have come up and your presentation. So yeah, thank you very much.
Could we, and appreciate your comments, could we have a sort of a nominated person we could work through with, or like we just don't want to walk out the door and sort of say, well, what do we do now?
Absolutely. So I'm happy to be the initial contact. It'll likely be Graham from our corporate team, because that's the team responsible for the LTP and annual plan. But certainly I'm happy to be the first connecting point to be able to link you into the organisation.
Thank you.
So Jenny will connect you up. Yeah.
Kia ora, thank you. Two minds think alike. I was just looking for someone to help us guide and navigate this process. I would just like to leave you with one thought. We mentioned a few times this is Cancer Society's project, but can I humbly suggest that it's our project, our collective project for our communities, with the social and economic need we have here each and every day. So I'd like you to feel that it's as much yours as it is ours. We're just custodians and guardians for the mahi that we do.
Bye. Yeah, kia ora. Thank you very much. Okay, councillors, we're on to the meaty business of the RM reform update. So we've got Stephen here, Adele and Rachel, the dream team. You're all the dream team. You're all the dream team.
Good morning, Chairman, councillors. You'll recall last time that I said I was -1 and Adele is a +1. We have Rachel, who is our neutral one. So I've just got a few slides just to, again, to set the scene, rather than duplicate the whole report into a presentation, just a few things to put us back into the picture of what we're discussing here. And then it's really, the team is up for questions. So the first thing I think we've mentioned before is that when national direction arrives, when the bill arrives, the response times are likely to be short. Generally, I don't agree with crystal ball gazing. You can spend a lot of time doing that. This is more about getting future ready for what's happening. So when these things drop, we are prepared because we have a good sense of what we think the implication is going to be. And I'll come to that on the next slide around the timing. It gives us that ability to provide advice to central government if we are a little bit ahead of the game. And of course, some of the system mapping we're now doing is becoming quite challenging. And the example I always use is the RPS. We just don't know what happens to the RPS. Does it go up to the spatial plan? Does it go down to the natural kind of planning sense? Does some of it drop to district plan level? We don't know that. But the more thinking we can do is puts us in a good place to be able to then talk to central government about what's being proposed. And the last thing is about just us being responsive with our work programs. We're putting things on pause. There's some things we just need to continue with, and you'll see some of those later in the agenda. And there are a few things we need to start, and system mapping is one of those starts. This is the diagram I keep coming back to, and it just exemplifies what we know and what we don't know. So the message from MFE at a recent presentation was, you've got 2 years to get ready. Of course, that's true if you know what you're doing. And I think I've just put, this is obviously the key date here, mid-2027, national direction is integrated into local government plans. So we kind of think that that's where the terminology around switching on, switching off comes from. National direction will say you must have this, you can have this, a spatial plan looks like this. The bit at the bottom though says that council starts developing combined plans. So then again, are we getting ready for 2027 or are we starting in 2027? The two big things. That's one of the key questions we are putting back to MFE to say, so can you tell us exactly what our work program is at this point looking like, not the policy direction, what are the steps we're taking here? What we do know though is that in it's now from the language is now from May, there'll be able to be feedback on the national direction. So that was the start of February, March, there was March, April, then it's May, June, now it's from the end of May. At the recent Rangataiki forum, the MFE said June is your time to feedback. So we need to be ready in June to understand what is now a comprehensive but succinct package of national direction. And that's one of our questions is, what does that look like? How much is it? Because that will guide our next steps. So just as part of this process, from the council workshop, which was back in April, staff have put together the top focus areas and principles. They're in section 6 of your agenda, just the way for staff to provide feedback and make decisions through this period. It's always a little bit uncertain when the new council forms, when it's back into its work and it's doing its mahi. But there are some things which staff can perhaps provide feedback on for this time, but there are some which I think we'd be uncomfortable doing. And so particularly that's around the institutional arrangements. Who makes decisions on the spatial plan? And how are they made? That's a governance decision. So if that is part of this process, we'd need to bring that back to the newly formed council in some form. Really, that's just the end of my little presentation, and really open for questions. I know we've had a number of discussions about this. The more we learn, perhaps the more questions we end up with, and we're hoping that soon that will start to stabilise.
Councillor Nees?
Thank you. How much cross-party consultation and agreement do you think that this work has got? Because our biggest nightmare is if we start gearing up for something that's going to be a major change and then suddenly it's turned off, like what happened with when the Labour government came in and left.
Namuta might be able to add to this as well. I suspect not a lot. Partly that's because of speed. There's limited staff doing a lot of work at the moment. So I think they're just running to get to where they need to be. In response to gearing up, we're doing the understanding. We're not writing anything for this new world. That will come later. This is just really about trying to get a better sense of what we think it will look like. So there's no gearing up occurring.
My only comment would be looking at your focus areas and principles regarding submissions in section 6. I think the devil is going to be in the transition detail as we strive to move forward with our consent renewals next year and our monitoring consents, and then when suddenly we get a completely different, potentially much more permissive consent regime, it's what happens to the existing consents, and do we have two different standards for controls on activities that have been consented? So it's that sort of stuff I think we need to be signalling to government that could be the difference between making our life very easy or making it extremely difficult. And so I was very pleased to see in the presentation that we saw about the work that's being done at Te Urukahika. That transition is a core focus area, but I think that we need to be emphasising that ourselves in everything we say to the government, because we've been running this big RMA system for a long time, and there's a lot of unpicking that would need to be done if we're moving into a completely different way of working. So thanks.
And just another little good example there is controlled activities. So that status has been signalled as disappearing. I'm sure there's a whole lot of good reasons for it. We are talking with our farmers around fresh water. The farm community like controlled activities. So that's another tension which that will need to be resolved first before so we can't do a lot of work picking or unpicking something which a large part of the economy is going to be saying we actually quite like this thing we had. So we need to wait.
Councillor Crosbie and then Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you. Stephen, I think Jane mentioned Te Urukahika, and I think that's a critical network, obviously, that you'll be linking into from a collective point of view from the regional sector. I think the clear messages coming from the government are around certainty, clarity and simplification. So the risk is how far do you go in presuming what may or may not be the guidance from the government as they work through it through the various bills and acts. I think you're on the right track at the moment. It's definitely work in progress, and you'll have to be prepared quite quickly because you're right. Once both bills are enacted, particularly, a lot's going to happen in a short period of time, an enormous amount. And that's where the tension will rise. I think it would be probably not appropriate at this moment to get into high levels of detail. I mean, effectively, the way I see it, both the TLAs and ourselves have the pick and mix components there in their plans and in our plans. So it's how in the future they'll be put together from the spatial plan, downwards to the other two pillars, the environmental plan and the planning act. So it will be difficult for you, but I generally believe that we're actually well placed to move quickly. And that's the other unfortunate thing, of course, is that we've got to reapply, some of us, if we choose to, for our job shortly. And again, I think in the next couple of months, you'll have to come back to us with some guidance from at least this council, because the new one, in reality, doesn't get up and running till February 26. There may be some bits and pieces they could do in between, but that's just the reality of the electoral term. And so that void needs to be covered somehow. So I think your next report to S&P, I don't know, maybe in August-ish, is going to be really important. Hopefully you'll have some more guidance from MFE and the government of the day, and Te Urukahika, I think will also play a big role through that transition, their own RM unit in there, or policy people, talking to our policy people. So not much else we can say at this stage about the report. You've highlighted, the risks and the opportunities, and as I say, the next critical one, I would suggest probably in where are we now? Probably 3 months' time.
Thank you. I mean, the only comment I'd make is that the language is all around simplicity, and we kind of get that, but we all also know that the natural world is quite complex. And so that's the tension that we will need to work through over time.
Saying that, having been involved in this even since the Town and Country Planning Act last century, with the greatest respect to the institutional planning, they can make simple things really difficult in a hurry that aren't necessary. And it's really around, and I think what this government's trying to do, which I support, is not make things so complicated hardly anything happens, because we've basically got into that position at the moment. at a high level. And so the challenge is, and that's around risk ultimately. So the challenge, I think, as you move forward as professional planners, is to get that message and to make sure that, as we say, that simplification, and as best you can, actually does happen. Because what the goal is to get somebody in Northland understand if they have a project in Southland, it's they don't give up, because people are giving up at the moment. And what's happening is, of course, successive governments have put in mechanisms to try and get stuff going to circumvent the current provisions. Fast track is classic. Previous government did something in housing, and the government before that also did something in housing. So that's what we're trying to avoid, is to get something that is that will move the nation forward, that will protect the environment and give people in business an opportunity to get stuff done. And that's a challenge for you as professional planners, is to understand that and achieve that goal. Good luck.
I feel I'm about to start defending the profession, so I won't.
I have a huge respect for the profession. I used to go to planning conferences years ago, so I do understand how difficult it is. And we're the ones that often put barriers in the way and say, you must do this and you must do that, or you must provide for this. So it's a joint challenge between governance and management.
And I think with all these things, I'm always relaxed if we acknowledge complexity and we choose simplicity, and we fundamentally do that on a case by case basis. It's about risk and reward. The thing I think we're going to struggle with particularly is things like allocation. The central government is saying we like allocation, and there's a bit of a criticism that the local government hasn't picked up allocative systems, such as market mechanisms to allocate water. And the issue is that we don't, because we don't have the information. And so if you can't put a black and white line around a resource, it's very difficult to run a market. And so it's sometimes these things, the misunderstanding is pointing at a different part of the system. And so it's easy to say you should do allocation. Absolutely. Here's an approach. Yes. Okay, fine. Now, do you have a model and an information database that supports it? Well, no, we don't. So what would you like us to do? And I think we'll come up against those as a nation a number of times now through this, which is kind of, at least that surfaces it, and we end up in a position.
Councillor Von Adelson.
Madam Chair, on Sunday, Minister Bishop actually, in his speech, spoke publicly about the RM reforms, and I'll just give you a couple of bits. So fast track is underway. It's the first of its going. Te Mana, this is directly from him. Te Mana o Te Wai will be repealed by the end of this year. Private property rights will underpin the starting point for the new RM reform. The aim is to get the reform bill into Parliament by September and into law before the end of their triennium. So when you say 27 is the key thing, in actual fact, if we ever change government 26, which is the next election, things could change. So, but the aim of this, and if they change, as National did with Labor, they reversed a couple of things very fast. Anything can happen in this game.
Chairman Leader.
Thanks, Chair. Look, this is a question following on from Councillor Crosby about the intent, which is essentially simplification. So I'm not too worried about water take consents. I think they will flow through naturally. I'm more concerned about the process sitting behind discharge consents. So we know at the moment there's going to be a new approach to it in terms of simplification. I know that there are persons out there applying for renewal of their consents now, and providers, so that's equipment providers, are saying to them, don't worry about it, we'll sort out your resource consent. We'll do all the interaction with the regional council. If there are conditions put on those consents that are subsequently changed by way of national direction, is there the ability for regional councils to retrospectively go back and change some of those conditions if they don't meet the national standards? So that's the first question. And secondly, because we know this change is coming and people are making applications, is there or should there be an expectation that disclosure from ourselves should be made to the applicants to say, things are changing, here are your options as a transition?
In relation to the first point, I guess we've got to wait to see what the legislation says about what we can do with the consent conditions. The EAG report has certainly indicated, well, they've recommended that there's a process of going back and stripping out conditions that are inconsistent with the new regime. But under the current framework, which is not what we'll be operating under, I don't think there'd be a clear basis to go back and review to update. But again, it will depend on what the new legislation actually says, because that's what we'll be operating under. And I expect that's something that a lot of people will be submitting on and interested in.
I mean, the controlled activity status is the same thing. We might issue a controlled activity consent now and the legislation says you're not allowed to have them. The question in transition is what then happens? Does it become a permitted activity with standards, or does it become a discretionary consent? This is where it's very hard to do a lot of work in planning for that, because we just don't know what they'll say. Yeah.
So in terms of disclosure though, because I think that's really important. You know, if someone lodges an application today, do we say to them, well, look, systems are changing. You can proceed with this under the current system, or this is another option.
Yeah, we don't make that disclosure, as far as I'm aware. A number of applicants are clearly, some people are not applying because there's change coming, and some people are applying because there's change coming. So there is a general understanding out there. For example, when we meet the sector groups, they're all very aware. They're talking to their members about it. It's something we could start saying that, look, you know, whilst you're applying here, please go and read this website just while you're there, kind of thing. Yeah.
I think we just need to think about it, because as you know, you've got to apply 6 months before the expiry.
Yeah.
And the only way they can escape that consent, someone's got to roll it over essentially, don't they?
Yeah, so I was just going to add that it depends on what their options are, and they may be very limited. So under the current regime that we're operating under, there's a statutory requirement that they have to apply within 6 months. And if they want to keep using their consent under the current system, they'll have to comply. So we can't really give them the option of not doing that. It's really for them to make a call, but they would be hedging their bets. It would be a pretty bold move to not apply, because they're waiting to see what happens, because they don't know what the new regime will actually look like. So for some, they just won't have an option.
Councillor Shirley?
Yeah, we certainly all live in a incredible time of flux and uncertainty. I certainly feel for the staff for the tasks that they have. But at 12:30 today, I'm representing this organisation, giving our presentation to the hearings of the Western Bay on Waters Done Well. And we opted to speak to our submission, but right up front, part of our submission is Bay of Plenty Regional Council strategic direction and community outcomes, direction and of several community outcomes stated in a long-term plan 24 to 34, goal 2, enabling Te Mana Otuwai through healthy and improving waterways and their ecosystems. That's Te Mana Otuwai in capitals, which is the program. So now we learn that it's been announced that it's about to be repealed. So, you know, it's in our long-term plan. Do you try and explain that to the district council? No, we're all in this incredible state of flux.
I mean, I think Te Mana Otuwai is a principle that, okay, if it's not in legislation, it is still a principle.
That's in lowercase. This is our uppercase, which is the program.
Oh. Councillor Nees.
Just a question about the core or the basis is private property rights. And it's a question for Rachel really. Are consents a private property right? Like people have applied for the permission to do something. They have been given permission to do something, and there's a whole lot of conditions around that. So I'd be interested, I mean, if the legislation says, well, you can't have anything that's less favourable than what you've got already. So if you take out some of the onerous stuff, that's fine. But how can you go back and change consents if they are a private property right when that is the core of what's being protected?
So I'll just go first on this one. The phrase they use, private property rights, the word private keeps sneaking into the discussion. The term used is property rights, and it's the new system will be based on property rights. What I keep saying around this is that's how this system works. It's how the town and country planning system worked. They all work off property rights. In fact, going back to the kings and the serfs, in England, that's property rights kind of thing. There's nothing new to this. It's just taking that dial between public and private and turning one way or the other. You cannot operate on a pure private property right system. And so it's just language that's in the messaging from central government, but it doesn't actually change anything. And so that's the kind of the point here. In fact, lots of public rights are still being enshrined in the system. In terms of the actual consent.
So it's a little bit nuanced, like everything is, but the RMA is clear that consents are not property. Obviously, there have been some cases where this issue, this concept's been teased out, but the statute itself is very clear at section 122 that consents are not real or personal property. But that is a slightly different concept from property rights as a principle. And I think your question's a really good one, and one that the government will have to grapple with, which is taking with one hand and giving with the other, and how they actually make that work.
Councillor Scott?
Yeah, 2 points. One is you're saying that part of your decision-making on any one program might be to cease, or at least rather to pause, to continue, to start. And I'll just ask you to add cease, stop, never to be seen again as one of the options, because pause makes me a bit nervous to say, well, you're going to keep it there one day.
Never say never, Ron.
Well, some things deserve to be never. Many things deserve to be never. But the more important point, you raised the red flag, which I think is a big one, about how decisions are going to be made at the right time, given that October the 11th is fast approaching. And I'm interested, I would be interested to know what we as elected members can do to facilitate that in some way, shape or form. I am nervous about this council making decisions that tie the next council in a way that the next council might not have done. But at the same time, we're elected until October the 10th. So decisions have got to be made. I'm also, I recollect that when I was first elected, it took a while to get an understanding about everything worked, and Councillor Crosby referred to February as when we're actually up and running. Well, that's not going to work for staff on, as you've alluded to. So I'm wondering if there is a way of a decision tree, a record of what decisions or how decisions were made in the first place without going through thousands of pages of minutes. I don't know how it could be done, but I'd be interested if you turn your mind to that, and especially what can elected members do to assist to make sure that we don't cause problems for this organisation because we're in this
So a couple of things there. There will be some stops in there. I mean, we did have stop pause as the title for that table, but we took stop out just in case, because we're just not, given what's happening around us. Yeah. The second point, I think probably we end up saying there are some things which staff will be able to work on. I mean, that's just, you know, almost a technical level, but the particularly things around the institutional arrangements around, you know, who owns these plans, who decides on these plans, how does that all work, kind of thing. There's one plan, but there are clearly two actors. Well, you know, there's TAs and there's the regional council. That's something which we would need council support on. Or in a sense, you know, the governance table needs to decide what they think is the way forward on that. Now, if that had to happen, you know, in November, I think we just have to go to Namuta and Fiona and say, you know, put the induction aside for a moment. We need to pick up this topic and get some feedback from council. Yeah, I mean, most of it can be kind of coped with on previous decisions, and staff are very experienced about what's going on here. But that is one which I think we would need to. That's governance, pure and simple.
I suppose if you're thinking that that is likely to be an issue, then as you're building that, this is the bits of information that a new person might not be aware of or need to understand, then you can sort of have that tidied up so that if it's a really quick decision needs to be made, you've got it in something can be presented.
And you recall that diagram I had of the time frame. So, for example, if in 2027 the legislation just says take all the bits you've got and smush them together and that's your plan, then we don't need any help. If it is, and in 2027 you're starting a new plan, well then the new councils will be well placed for that. If that's not the case, and the new plan is put together at the smushing time, then we need the institutional arrangements quite solid, and that's what we don't know.
Any more questions on the work programme table? Specifically, or section 6? Which is the focus areas, which kind of is that high level way of addressing exactly what Councillor Scott was bringing up, I suppose. Any more questions on that or anything else?
Move the recommendations, Chair, including the focus areas.
Okay, so we have a mover, Councillor Scott, a seconder, Councillor Itty. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we're ahead of the game, folks, so we will break for morning tea and we'll be back here at 11. Okay, councillors, we're back into it. So welcome, Dean. So Dean's going to be taking us through the adoption of the Eastern Bay Plenty Economic Development Strategy Refresh. Over to you, Dean. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. Yes, so presenting the Eastern Bay Economic Development Strategy Refresh for your consideration today. I'll take the report and the strategy document as read. It's noted in the report, the draft strategy informed the Eastern Bay Regional Deal proposal and was appended to that. It's also connected and complements the Eastern Bay Spatial Plan, which is under development. The 3 Eastern Bay District Councils have adopted this strategy already, so Opotiki on 29th of April, Kawerau on the 30th of April, and Whakatane on the 8th of May. So those 3 district councils will now turn their attention to developing locally focused economic development strategies. Just some items of relevance from the district council discussions on this item. So Kawerau had resolved to delegate authority to their chief executive to make minor editorial amendments based on the feedback of their elected members at that discussion. They'd also want the adopted strategy to be provided to the Department of Internal Affairs to supersede the draft strategy that was appended to the Eastern Bay Regional Deal proposal. So that's a fairly simple thing we can do. Not a resolution, but they also agree that a formal letter be created to front load the document, and that will be signed by the 3 Eastern Bay mayors and the regional council chair. And Whakatane, the main point of discussion was around future costs for any intercouncil projects, and they just generally agree that the approach of proportional allocation based on population was a good way to continue. And noting that when those projects came up to council, that staff would take those projects to council for approval of the scope and the budget. And no items from Opotiki in their discussion. So with that, happy to take some questions to support council's discussion.
Councillor Nees.
Firstly, I really support signing it off. It's actually a really good piece of work. The only question I had is that it's already dated because of the decision on the Whakatane Boat Harbour, which has now been stopped, and it says it's paused. So I don't believe it's our position to suggest changes to the strategy because we weren't actually involved in its development. But just to note, I guess that it's a document that's at a point in time and it will date. There will be some things that will change, and we signed it off accepting that. Thanks.
Councillor Iti.
Yeah, kia ora. I would tautoko that too, and note also that the situation with Toiria at the moment, and they're involved that in the document. So it is for me the datedness of the document.
Councillor Scott.
Just ask the involvement with the spatial plan and the economic strategy, is they align in your view?
Yes, they are. So when this was being developed, the staff were keeping it abreast of the spatial plan development at the same time, and there was good interaction between the two. With the implementation of this economic development strategy, there was talk about setting up a governance group, and rather than setting up a separate one to the spatial plan, was decided that the spatial plan governance group should oversee implementation of the strategy, because effectively you'll have the same people on 2 governance groups. So where possible, we've tried to align all those at the same time. And I think the cross-cutting constraints that have been identified in that strategy, a couple of them will be actually addressed through the spatial plan as well, rather than separate economic development strategies. So yes, tried to align those as closely as possible as that was being developed.
Any other questions? Okay, so we've got 3 recommendations. Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, sorry, looking at the wrong section on my run sheet. So one is to receive the report, and the other is to adopt it. Happy to move. Councillor Iti, seconder. Councillor Crosby, all in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Dean. Awesome. Okay, Rotorua Airshed. Welcome, Karen. So you have a presentation for us this morning, don't you?
I do, thank you.
Great.
Just to note, this is not my project, this is Elsa Weir's work, but she's very unwell today, so she's asked if I can present for her. Don't want to take credit for someone else's very hard mahi here. So I'm just going to have a brief 4-slide presentation just to set the scene, and then we can ask some questions afterwards. So currently the Rotorua e-shed is complying with the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality for PM10. Not wanting to jinx it, we are on track to lose our polluted airshed status on the 24th of this month, which is really exciting. That takes 5 years to get to that point with no exceedances. And this has come from, the success is basically from the significant investment from a lot of people, significantly from this council financially with all our hotspot loans. There was a lot of support from RLC to put our bylaw in place, and there's been a lot of community engagement, and this has been passed over, of course, to the compliance team, and a lot of work carried out by Marion Hinton, which I believe she updates you on regularly at the Monitoring and Ops Committee. So it's based on continuous improvement, so small changes done over a long period of time. I think we started this significantly in 2005, roughly. The action plan went in 2008, so it's been a long time, but we have seen real change and real improvement through that sustained action. So it's a real success story. So I think it was in August 2022, Elsa came to you with a paper and you approved that a new action plan get kick-started off. However, the amendments to the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality are still delayed, and that's where we get all our ambient standards from that we base our policy on. We're not convinced that we're going to get anything new soon in terms of standards. So what staff are requesting at this point is to pause a new action plan until the national direction has been updated. This is not a significant change, simply because there was not a lot to put in the action plan. It's on track, it's already meeting its standard. It have a little bit of benefit now. For example, we think that the PM 2.5 standards will come in at some point, and Rotorua is not meeting those at the moment. But managing for PM10, which we will continue to do, is also managing for the PM 2.5. Almost all of the PM 2.5 in Rotorua in winter time is from is PM10. So you're managing the same thing. It's from the same source. We also thought that community will go into consultation fatigue if we go to them with an action plan that doesn't really say much, to be brutally honest. It's better to go to them with something that they can make a real contribution to. So we are requesting that instead of doing an action plan, we start work on the bylaw. This actually does have a deadline. It must be done by 2027. It's due for its renewal. It takes about 2 years to get all the background work in and to start socialising that with the community. Obviously, we go to RLC because it is their bylaw. So it's going to take some time to get those little steps in place and get them completed to get a new bylaw. And the new bylaw is an opportunity to close some loopholes, which I don't actually know what they are, to be honest, because I don't implement them, but I probably wouldn't say them in a public forum either.
Just make them up.
Could say anything. So for example, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to say what they are, even if I knew. But for example, the ultra low emission wood burners were not part of the existing bylaw because we hadn't yet investigated them properly. They were very new. There's a real opportunity, for example, to provide for those in the new bylaw. The costs are minimal. This is all part of staff BAU. We are always writing policy and looking to renew ageing policy and provisions. And my understanding is that the Rotorua Air Quality Working Party has endorsed this. So it has already gone to a couple of the Rotorua Lakes district councillors, and they're endorsing this, this work.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple of our Rotorua councillors chomping at the bit, starting with Councillor Thurston and then Councillor Winters.
You sold it very well, Karen, full marks. And our thoughts go to Elsa at the stage. Hey, yes, we are crying out for national direction, and there's a big vacuum in that space. And as you rightfully said, the Rotorua Air Quality Working Party and RLC endorsed the bylaw review. Dare I say, much is said recently in terms of collaboration with the RLC. But this is genuinely one of the success stories of working closely with them. But it is a health and safety issue, and it's appropriate to pause it at this stage. I think it's a good strategic move. So I'm more than happy to move the recommendations 1 to 4 and acknowledge you, Karen, for the way that you've sold it to us today. Full marks.
Thanks, Councillor Winters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, endorse the comments of my colleague Lyle. Happy to second, Madam Chair, the recommendations. Can I just say to my colleagues, this has been a long journey, 15 years plus. We've pretty well got there. The status of the airshed is going to be changed because we've got that 5-year clearance. But my understanding, Karen, the status may change, but the bylaws are still operative to help staff enforce even more. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct, councillor. And we also have a very strict policy in the air chapter, policy 3, which basically says you still have to manage your discharges to make sure they don't create a breach or an exceedance of any of the ambient standards. Yeah. So that's we fought hard to keep that as it was, and that is still sitting there in our air plan as operative. Yeah.
Good news story, Madam Chair.
I just had a question around the table, the WHO comparison table. So, I mean, I think you've answered it because you said that when we're measuring PM10, we're also capturing the 2.5, because I see that we're not specifically, we don't specifically have any current measures of 2.5, but
we have the ambient standards, which are it's a very old document. It's a 2002 document, the equality guidelines. And we use that as a basis of how we're going. But obviously the WHO guidelines are now lower than that. Until they sort of set exactly what it is, until MFE sort of come out and say, this is our line, we would expect them to be close to, if not exactly what the World Health Organization are recommending.
Yeah, but I see just on the actual chart, there aren't any figures in our current levels of 2.5.
Have it with me.
Oh, sorry, it's page.
No legal standards.
Oh, yeah, thank you. There's no, so just saying that there's no legal standard set for it at all. It's all just a guideline.
I know, but in terms of measuring it, we're not actually measuring.
Oh yes, we are, definitely. We have monitors. We have a monitor in Rotorua, and also we have 3 monitors measuring PM10 in the Mount Maunganui airshed as well.
No, the 2.5.
Yes, the 2.5.
Okay, in Rotorua as well.
Yes.
Oh, I thought because there were dashes on those, that meant we didn't actually have measures for the 2.5.
I think it'll be a legal limit that we're missing at the moment.
Okay,
yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, that was just clarity. Any other question? Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you for the report. From an iwi perspective, they like lighting fires, all sorts of fires. But I think that they've played really well in this part as well. And this is the sort of feedback I've been getting. Is that your sense of things?
I haven't been in the space for quite some time, but my understanding from staff who are doing it, yes, that is it. Yeah, there's some good feedback. Yeah.
Any other questions? Right.
Through the chair, could I just add something?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't hear what you said.
I just wanted to note that this is a significant achievement for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and Rotorua Lakes Council. We have gone from a polluted airshed in Rotorua over the last 20 years to work to get it in a space to where on the 24th of May, we've had no exceedances in the past 5 years is hugely significant. I don't know if you recall, but there was an article back in, I think it was 2007, which actually said that this work, improving the air quality in Lake Rotorua, is estimated to save approximately 22 lives annually. So that's how significant this work is.
Do we have a communication plan for this to get the message out there? And
through the chair, absolutely we do. We've got Laura in the back there from comms, given that this is a key message. We're just working through timing, linking with Rotorua Lakes Council as well, in relation to when. We want to share this more broadly, particularly because it's the 24th of May is the date. So yes, we do have a comms plan, don't we, Laura?
Yeah, classic example of how, regional council working with the local authority can produce outcomes that, benefit and in this case save lives. So a really good news story, and I think the comms will get that out there, and because it is a really good example of best practice, what can be achieved. So, Councillor Thurston, you have a, do you have
Yeah,
another question?
Can I
Yeah.
just say, I've chaired this for a number of years, as you know, and I think one of the great success stories was having the medical officers of health inside the tent right throughout, and they've been incredibly valuable, particularly around the health and safety issues. So, no, full marks, but it's a hugely collaborative committee, and also, dare I say, you know, full marks. And I know Councillor Winters and White will help me out here, that Kāinga Ora have played a huge part, you know, with the Kāinga Ora capital of the country, as we all know, being flippant. And they've gone beyond the call of duty and retrofitting all their homes. But no, the big coup was having the medical officers of health inside the tent from day one. Thanks, Chairman.
Great. And just out of interest, with sustainability options, the 20 Degrees programme, how much has that impacted these outcomes, would you say, in terms of the wood burners, or are they more working on the insulation and the windows? And
I think my understanding is that it's insulation and windows, but it all forms part, because our overriding principle has always been warm homes and clean air. We never wanted to compromise one over the other. So it's definitely helped.
Yeah. And we have current funding for that organisation, don't we? Ongoing.
Oh yes, apparently some yes.
Yeah. All right, so we have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Thurston, Councillor Winters. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried.
And I'm just going to be a wee bit cheeky here and just put in there, if you haven't heard, the final decision for PC13 has been released from the Environment Court on the 24th of April. We will come up to council with some adoption of all of that and making operative at the next S&P meeting. So we'll see you then. Thank you.
So thanks so much. Right, on to plan change 11. Welcome, Freya and Penny. So this is our geothermal update and the next steps. Over to you.
Just again, Elsa Weir was meant to be sitting at the table with us today, but she's very unwell. So Stephen is her lovely replacement. He also knows one or two things about RM reform, so we thought that he could get the tricky questions. So a bit of just by way of a bit of background, I guess, Plan Change 11 is the geothermal plan change. It was designed to kind of update and bring together the two separate geothermal plans that we have for the region. So the Rotorua plan, which is standalone, and then the geothermal chapter in the natural resources plan. There were three core parts to that. So the region-wide part of the plan change, you may recall that was the part of the plan where we had said there was nothing fundamentally wrong with that part of the plan. We were just bringing it up to best practice standards in terms of plan drafting, modernising, and filling a few minor policy gaps where the RPS had provided direction that wasn't currently in the regional plan. That included our system classification approach as part of that part of the plan change, which is, I'll just remind you, a fundamental part of Council's management approach to geothermal. So that's really key. The Rotorua geothermal system part of the plan change, that was the part of the plan where we needed to do a lot of changes, where we were really cementing in all of that work that we had done through the development of the Rotorua geothermal system management plan. So embedding what had been approved as part of the system management plan and giving it teeth through the regional plan change process. So putting policy and rules in that could then support the operational intent that had been developed over 5 or 6 years with the community. And then there was the low temperature geothermal systems part of the plan, where at that time that we were releasing the plan, the intention was to really focus on that fresh water and geothermal integration. So we released a draft plan in October last year. That was a really significant milestone and an important part of the process. That was out for feedback until the end of January 2025, so a reasonable length of time. The feedback that we received was of a really high quality, I would say, and it was largely really constructive. So, of course, not everybody agreed with everything the way it was written, but the parties that we heard from were key agencies, and they gave us really good feedback that was really usable in terms of making our policy better and plans better. So that's great. It's really good to get that kind of feedback when you're a planner and you're trying to draft. Some of the feedback on that regional part of the plan change was of note. So that was where, as staff, we felt it presents areas of likely challenge. So key things, I guess, were there were some that said that the plan change shouldn't progress in such an uncertain policy landscape. So with everything that's going on in the RM space, there were those that felt that that places a resource burden. So if we were to go ahead with the plan change and then have to do an additional plan change because of that changing landscape, then there's a financial and time burden on people to have to submit twice and participate in processes. There was also some feedback around the ongoing Treaty of Waitangi claims around governance and ownership of geothermal resources. That has come through the system management plan development. That is an ongoing conversation, and as you will know, and as we've always talked about, that is not something that council can address, but it is valid feedback to receive. Just reiterating that point, I guess. And then there was some feedback which was seeking changes to our system classification approach. So that approach, just by way of a reminder, that's where we have some systems that are protected. So for example, Waimangu, some systems that are special classifications like Rotorua, where there's some use, but really we manage that fragile system for the protection of the geysers and the features, and some systems which are development. So Kawerau, for example, where we acknowledge that there's not many surface features there, and absolutely it's the best place for development to occur. So some of those challenges were seeking to change that, and by that I mean they were seeking to remove protected status from protected systems, or looking to move from conditional development to development systems. So a risk, I guess. I guess also just to add to that, that system classification approach is also used by Waikato Regional Council. So it's a system across the Taupo volcanic zone. It has in the past always been generally supported by industry. We think it works really well. It has also in the past been generally supported by central government. So you will have seen it had come through things like the NPS, Indigenous Biodiversity. That approach is locked in to those types of central government documents. Since we've released the draft, there's been one or two changes, and the policy landscape has really changed significantly. That reform process has challenges and implications for the plan change, and that's why we're here, because those need to be considered carefully, I guess, in terms of where to next. So that leads us to the options in terms of where do we go next. So the three options presented in the paper, whether we progress with the plan change as current committee direction. Option 2 is where we pause the region-wide plan change and we progress with the Rotorua geothermal part of the plan change only. That is what we as staff are recommending. Or option 3, we delay all aspects of the plan change until we've got the RM reforms enacted and less uncertainty in that space. So we are very strongly recommending option 2. And why are we recommending that? So we think that it provides, in an uncertain time, it provides a lot of certainty for Rotorua in particular, in that it gives really clear plan direction around what council's expectations are around that very fragile and precious system. So it reduces the risks of having to fight those contentious issues around use on a consent by consent basis, because people are clear about what they can and can't do in Rotorua. It also ensures that limits for that system are implemented. So the system's still really fragile. It needs to be managed very, very carefully. We do have some limits in the existing plan, but the limits that would come through this plan change are around that heat and energy limit use, which is new. Now, for the types of uses that we would potentially be seeing going forward, so if you were to get a large hotel development, for example, that was looking for heat use through downhole heat exchangers, then there's nothing in our plan at the moment that puts a cap on what that can go to. So we could absolutely work through a consent process and push back on some elements, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to push back on everything. And it could get tricky if it was challenged, I guess, is the key message there. The other thing that option 2 does is that it ensures that that Rotorua SMP direction that was really tested with our community and had a lot of buy-in across the board, is that that gets reflected in policy. So in particular, that prioritisation of use that was embedded in the SMP, protecting the features first and foremost, and then cascading down to where commercial uses sit at the bottom. That gets locked in through the plan change, and that aligns with the community expectations. So we spent a long time working on that plan. We had a lot of support across the board on that plan. And I guess just then, in summary, why else option 2 is we feel that it aligns with the direction that we're seeing central government is proposing. So environmental limits, moving past a first in, first served approach to allocation, looking at different ways of doing that, protecting the tourism values of Rotorua, which enables economic growth of Rotorua. So tourism for Rotorua is huge. It's really important. We need to protect that part of the economy. We think it's ticking quite a lot of boxes in that RM space. I mean, you can never be certain, obviously, but this is the part of the plan that we are most certain on. And it also recognises the value of Rotorua plus the community commitments that we've made in the face of that policy landscape uncertainty. Questions?
Thank you. Great. So we have online Councillor Winters, first of all, started for 10.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just waiting for my colleague, Councillor Thurston or White, to move it, and I'm happy to second it. Thank you, Penny and Freya, for presenting this. I think this is a really, really good option. We've been through the hearings and deliberations of the system management plan. We had a lot of discussion. We had a lot of decisions to make, but yet when we were doing the system management plan, we realised we actually had no teeth to give staff any comfort that if as Freya said, a big hotel came on board, we couldn't do any rules. So this is giving the system management plan of Rotorua some teeth to enact and put some rules in place. So more than happy to move or second it, depending on where my other colleagues lie. But I think this is, again, the end of a long journey with our staff, Penny and Freya and Elsa, to get us here today. So for my colleagues to fully support this and give our staff comfort that we've been there, we've done that, and this is the next step in a process. So message ends, Madam Chair.
Just go to Councillor Lees and then over to you, Councillor Thurston.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd really like to acknowledge the amount of work that you as staff have actually done on this. I reflect that it hasn't been an easy process, and I greatly respect your professionalism and the standard of the work done to date. Saying that, I'm worried, having looked through the submissions, that we might find ourselves with this plan in front of the courts for a long time because of the depth of feeling and the nature of the people that are actually submitting on the plan. One thing I would like to clarify before I go on in that vein is to ask, these classification system was set in the RPS, and it is the RPS that is the one that has set that framework under which this plan sits. So if people are appealing the plan or submitting against the classification system, is the fact that it's in the RPS mean that those submissions don't have weight because then we're not actually looking at the RPS at the moment? Does that rule those concerns out? How would they be dealt with in the Environment Court?
Yeah, so yes, it is in the RPS. The classification system is also in the Regional Natural Resources Plan. So it was in the Natural Resources Plan first, and then it was lifted up to the RPS. My understanding, and it may be a lawyer question, but my understanding is that having it in the RPS absolutely gives us some safety around it, but I don't know if it completely removes the ability for somebody to challenge it through the regional plan change process.
Well, then I have to confess, since it will be a live submission issue.
Sorry, just to be clear there, option 2 closes that issue off because we don't open up the Regional Natural Resources Plan classification system. We only look at Rotorua. Yeah.
I still am worried about progressing the progress on the plan in this uncertain regulatory environment, and I'd really like some guidance from Stephen on that.
So there is no guarantee on this. And what we worry about is ending up in the Environment Court for 3 years, and that just rolls on past that point. I've been very clear with the team to ask them in terms of, again, no guarantee, is this something which has the issues that get raised, are they things that can be addressed and dealt with? So for example, through mediation before you get to the Environment Court process. The work that's been done on the system management plan, which is engaging with our community, and with the Ahika group, which is engaging with the iwi, gives the team confidence that to the extent we can say it, there is the issues are on the table, and we know the scope and extent of them, so that we think that this is a thing which can progress through that period, and there is a chance that it will be resolved, but if not, the issues that come through will be quite focused. So for example, ownership will be raised, we know that, but we cannot address that. So there's a lot of background, a lot of preparation work, a lot of community engagement, iwi engagement that goes to this point. So I can't offer you a guarantee that we won't go to the Environment Court, but this is something which we think can be progressed substantially through this process.
Just a further question, we would have hearings for these submissions and decisions made. And like Plan Change 9, we could always decide not to accept the recommendations of the hearings panel and stop it then. Because I do think we have to be considerate of ongoing costs for council in this period when so much is going to change. Have you got a budget, and how long do you think this process will take to get it to the point that it has had its hearings and we have a recommendation from a panel? How long and how much have you set aside for that?
So in terms of how long, the next steps are to bring a draft back to you, which would be later this year. Of course, local body elections kind of scrunch the timeframes, but we've done so much work on the Rotorua kind of provisions in the Section 32 that it's all sort of sitting there waiting, ready to go. So we feel we can get that back to this committee to a workshop quite quickly. We're hoping to do that late June, I think is the timing of the next. So that's quite a quick turnaround to bring something back to you. and then get the plan released by the end of this year is the timing for that. In terms of the submissions and hearings process on that, that would have to kick in next year once that new council is in place. So as has been mentioned previously, that's not before February. So we look to leave those submission periods open for a reasonably long length of time to give people plenty of time, but also to allow the new council to settle in. In terms of budget, that's probably more something, it's within the kind of budgets that are accounted for. There's not a standalone budget for the Rotorua plan. It's just part of our geothermal program budgets.
Based on that, I think, depending on what the rest of the council decides to do, I think we could build in stop points, could we not? If we start progressing and then we see the shape of the national policy direction, we'd have adequate time to stop, so that we don't commit the council to an ongoing expensive process going forward if it's completely different, the new policy environment.
You would have heard Freya talk about the fact that this is about allocation, about environmental limits, and about economic growth at the end of the day. So that was again one of the questions we teased out through this process of saying, is this a pause or a continuation? So we think it's aligned, but as you say, when we see the actual detail of what comes through, we would have to do a review at that point.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just add in terms of the costs, much of the technical work was done as part of the system management plan development. So we don't have a lot of external costs associated with the plan change at the moment for Rotorua. And going back to the likely points of challenge, I mean, I think Freya's covered that off really well. We're talking about limits. We know no one's challenging those fundamentally. It'll be a nuanced discussion. Values-based allocation, we've got a lot of support for that. Again, it's the details of not the fundamental opposition to it. We think that we can work our way through that with submitters successfully.
Councillor Thurston and then Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, I just wanted to support the comments made by Councillor Winters. This has been a long time in gestation, and full marks to our staff in this area. They've been exemplary, and the consultation and community involvement in this neck of the woods was absolutely superb. From bore users to everyone else, the wider community, the industries, the hotel groups, but most importantly of all, the inclusion and the weight put on the contribution of Hokainga. So, no, I believe that the staff have got it right. I don't share a lot of Councillor Nees's concerns, and I'm very happy to support this and move the recommendations on page 78.
Councillor Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, great work. I certainly support the recommended option. One of the submitters, though, I recall, challenged us in terms of the use of some of our technical terms. It's a sort of quite a narrow, fine matter, but from memory, they questioned we use bar for pressure instead of kilopascal, the new SI unit, or not so new anymore. And also, I think we use compressibility instead of, they said we'd be more correct to use condensability. Have we taken up those points, those technical points that were raised?
Not specifically taken them up in terms of, I think it was Waikato Regional Council that commented on it, and that they were seeking consistency with the way that they, the way that they report on those things. We work with Waikato and their scientists really closely through regular catch-ups with them, and absolutely it is something that we'll talk through with them about why they're recommending that. We obviously rely quite heavily on GNS science for our modelling and the terminology that's used. So again, it's something that we can follow up with them just to see why those queries are being raised. It's outside my expertise as to what little letters should be on the end of each of those numbers.
Councillor White and then Councillor Iti.
Yeah, kia ora, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you for your report. I know how long the journey has been and how tough it has been. I sat in on several of the AHUKA meetings, and they've agreed and supported the work that you're doing, with the exception that any matters relating to the treaty be left out of it. And there's emotive issues and very strong issues around ownership of the resource that is before the treaty claims process. So it was agreed that leave that lie there, and they will do that through a separate process. Because I also note in here that you make a comment that you've held a lot of iwi and hapa meetings out there and gathered some views from them. And then I noted also that some of the ones that were expected to be heard from in particular, they did not make any formal process or claims to that. So they must have been quite significant groups. If there were, are they more on the treaty framework, or are they some issues about access to the resource?
Sorry, just to clarify, you're asking about the groups that didn't provide written feedback, but that we've subsequently talked to?
That was the first instance, but
Yeah.
you make a comment here as well that you expected to hear from some institutions that didn't submit.
Yeah, so I think in some instances there was a lot going on at that time. So it was at the same time where those groups were also having to write submissions to central government on the Treaty Principles Bill. We understand that. We've followed up with some groups. So we've had follow-up conversations with Tikitiri and Ngāti Rangatira, Te Arere Koromātua Council, for example. We had already been having conversations with them and working with them. And I haven't explicitly asked them, but I think because we are having those conversations, they felt that they were able to be raising their issues directly with us as staff. That feedback is also incorporated into this process. So it's not, if there is an absence of a written feedback, doesn't mean that we don't listen to what somebody says in the room, as you'll know. It hasn't been central to it hasn't been around the treaty claims. That doesn't seem to have been what we've heard in terms of reasons for not providing feedback, but that may be the case for some of the groups that we are still yet to hear from. I'm unsure. Yeah.
I'm very supportive of the AHUKA position. I think that's important. That's for the sake of the council, that's the Ohonomotu, and to the east, going out to Ōwhata down out that area, and then to the south to Tuharangi Wāhia, Whakarewa, whatever, along those regions. And they're all, collectively supported. We had a little bit of a mumble around the treaty claim and the ownership of the resource, but generally speaking, I think the support was there. There's lots of emotions around this particular issue. I expect that there'll still be some ruckus that'll come downstream from some of the iwi, but generally, for the sake of the process that you've gone through, I support it. And just wait to see what happens in the other part that we could not play a part in when it comes to the treaty claims. So thank you for your work.
Councillor Iti.
Kia ora. I'm, Madam Chair, certainly happy to support on the guidance of our Rotorua councillors with regards to the raucous or not that will most likely happen, and to at least progress to those next steps. But my question is about the other geothermal spaces within our region, and I guess, are we ring fencing some litigation money for this? Because certainly over in Kauro, the system classification, there's some quite substantial generators over there, and whether or not they, how they'll feel about this, and whether you're across that, because I'm sure that's an ongoing conversation with them as well, especially we've just passed the Eastern Bay economic strategy, and power generation, and certainly Minister Jones has also indicated there's a lot of plans for Kauro in particular. So just wanted some comment on that.
Thank you. Yes, well, in Kauro, we've got a very different situation, as you know. So that's classified as a development system. So the existing policy framework for that is quite enabling anyway. We weren't looking to change that significantly through Plan Change 11 if we were to proceed. And it's also quite heavily consented already, with 3 major tappers taking 170,000 tonnes a day. So there's a lot going on there that we wouldn't have thought would be directly impacted by the regional plan change regardless. We have a system management plan also for Kawerau, which was developed with the TAPers, with the major consent holders, and that's currently under review. And as I keep being reminded by the senior compliance officer, I need to push that along a little bit more quickly. We are 80% of the way there. But we'll be bringing that back to you for the reviewed SMP towards the end of this year. So I think the system management plan gives us that whole system management approach and comfort to the consent holders that it's largely business as usual.
Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, ladies. Just the one question, and it's probably been brought up before, but I'm going to raise it because I remember it being raised as an issue at Komiti Māori when we were at Ohinemutu. And also of the content of the Fenton agreement that you've supplied to us. I just want, and I totally support the three councils from Rotorua, but I guess just for my peace of mind, can you tell me, based on the Fenton agreement and moving forward, where does Ngāti Whakaue sit in that process moving? And I think it's sort of stemming to from the issues that Jane has raised. And just to give a level of comfort for us, where does Ngāti Whakaue sit in this plan change moving forward, given the Fenton agreement?
For you, Madam Chair, I think we've got someone in the room that's probably better placed to answer that than staff, but Ngāti Whakaue have a live treaty claim as well. They're obviously got interest in Y2358, so they still have a live, they have settled in part, but they still have a live geothermal treaty claim, and the Fenton agreement is central to that.
Any other questions?
I'll just talk of that last comment that the Fenton agreement is fundamental in their treaty claim.
I just had a question that sort of sparked from Councillor Iti's question, which isn't really to do with this because this will be paused, but with the Kawerau SMP refresh, are there many learnings coming from, you know, how it was before to now, or is it quite similar?
I think most of the changes are more of a reflection of changes in operational best practice. So, for example, it's the discharge strategy. So through their monitoring and reservoir modelling, and with oversight from the peer review panel, there's now a new preferred discharge approach, which all of us are comfortable with. One of the sticking points has been significant geothermal features and where they are, whether they've been identified. So we've just been doing a body of work to fill that gap. So that will also feed into the review. We see these operational documents, possibly less so for Rotorua, but for Kawerau, it's very operational, it's very live, and we're always looking just to shift so that we're reflecting the best way of doing things on the system.
Right, so we have some recommendations here. We've had mover and seconder, haven't we? Yeah. Yeah, so all in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Right, so staying in the hot seat, Penny and Freya, again, we're on to Tauranga geothermal SMP. Summary of the feedback and our next steps for that. Over to you again.
We're still reeling from that decision because that means we've got a whole lot of work to do now.
You need a moment to breathe.
But there was part of us that were going, stop everything. But I can say that now, Stephen. No. So thank you for that. And I guess I'm talking about the Tauranga System Management Plan, and maybe the first question you have is, well, what is our decision we've just made? How does that impact this next discussion? I think it's fair to say it doesn't really. The system management plan is an operational document. It's not an RMA statutory regional plan. So it's not going to be as affected by reforms as a regional plan change. The other thing is that without the regional plan change 11, the system management plan will become even more important in the interim. It will give us guidance in our day-to-day management of the low temperature geothermal system. And it's, I guess, with that framing up the discussion as we go forward. We, as outlined in the report, I haven't got a presentation because it's a fairly straightforward paper, but essentially we released the draft in October last year, similar to at the same time as Plan Change 11. And we had the submissions open till end of January. We only received a very small number of submissions on the SMP specifically. We had some submissions that traversed both issues, but we also got informal feedback through our tailored engagement process, so including at market days and a low temperature workshop that we held in Tauranga, which was really well attended. So as Freya said, all of that informal feedback is still absolutely taken into account. It's still really important for us through this process. The type of feedback we got, noting it was quite limited, is all summarised in table 1 of the report as well. So without going into the detail of that, it's fair to say that we got to the end of this process and we realised that there were some quite big gaps. The main gap related to iwi engagement. Freya's already touched on this. There was a lot going on. We don't take a lack of engagement by tangata whenua in this space as a lack of interest. At all. We know there is interest, and we realise that we need to find out what those values and interests are. So we've engaged Toi Kairawa, and I think they presented, I've actually just been away on holiday, but I think they presented to Komiti Māori a couple of weeks ago. So we've engaged them to help us traverse this space, and they're talking to various iwi hapu, but particularly ahuwhenua trusts, about the values of geothermal, opportunities for low temperature geothermal use, obstacles and their management aspirations. So that's a really important body of work to plug some gaps as we move forward. We've also got some more technical work to do. So looking at what we're doing with metering requirements, with monitoring, those kinds of things that we need to do some more thinking on. And finally, in the consenting space, we've had quite a bit of feedback about the way the consenting process works for small geothermal takes in Tauranga. There are quite different views on that. So it depends on who you're talking to about what message you get. So some think it's too onerous, some think it's not onerous enough. We're working closely with our consents and compliance team to look at how we navigate that going forward. So where's that sweet spot? We don't want to be too onerous. We want, I think Councillor Crosby might have mentioned earlier, we don't want to stand in the way of things happening. We don't want to stand in the way of people wanting to have a spa pool using geothermal energy or heat their home. But we also want to make sure that we're getting the right information and that we're monitoring and managing the system in a sustainable way. So with all of those things in mind, what we're proposing is that we do that work over the next 6 months or so. I'd like to say we could do it more quickly, but now we'll be digging deep for getting this plan change over the line, this part of the plan change. And so towards the end of the year, we will bring back a revised system management plan for your consideration. We could bring it to a workshop first or take your guidance on that, or we could bring you a track change version of the SMP. And we'll seek your feedback and decisions on that from that point. So that is it's actually no recommendation, it's information only. So just progressing with the system management plan as described in the report.
I think there are.
Oh, are there?
There are recommendations.
Maybe they were put in place before I went away on holiday.
Oh, things change. Things change around here all the time. So thank you for that. That's really clear. And thanks for those words to support the report. Questions, Councillor Crosby?
Just quickly, and thank you for that. And, it's an evolving plan. What currently informs the conditions of consent?
So the regional plan obviously contain the existing provisions of the geothermal chapter of the regional natural resources plan create the framework which we assess our consents in terms of what the requirements are. I think some of the sticking points often relate to iwi engagement. And we had a brief talk yesterday at our geothermal management group meeting around what's reasonable, what are the reasonable expectations around that. And I think we need to do more work with the consents team and in particular with iwi and Hapu about what their expectations are about again, what that sweet spot is. But in terms of requirements for consenting, that's all in the existing regional plan.
So thank you for that. And so the purpose of the SMP, which is operational, will any component parts of that inform requirements?
Yeah, that's the intent. So with any discretionary consenting process, the point is discretion. So an operational document can provide more detail and provide the nuance to give consent officers, but also consent applicants more of a sense and a feel for what the scope of consent conditions might be. So it doesn't override the regional plan. That's a really important point to make, and it doesn't change people's existing consented rights and obligations, but it does give some more detail around an explanation around that. So an example would be when we're dealing with a resource consent, whether we re-inject or don't re-inject isn't specified in the current regional plan. There's some policy guidance on that, but it's not specific. So the system management plan can contain much more detail around that about when re-injection may or may not be useful, what temperatures we'd be looking at and all the considerations. So it's almost a guidance document in some respect. But most importantly, the system management plan gives that whole system management approach. It's not looking at things on a consent by consent basis. It's saying overall, this is what we want to achieve. Overall, these are the values, and overall, this is our approach for achieving sustainable management rather than consent by consent.
Quickly follow on from that. The challenge and some of the submitters have said around also addressing at the same time just water takes and warm water takes. Are you, and if so, how are you proposing to address that?
I'm not quite sure I understood that question. Could you?
I think in the submissions, there was a question around water takes as well as hot water takes.
So that integrated approach, yeah, that's the main sticking point for Tauranga. So effectively, the groundwater allocation limits affect how we allocate geothermal. And that's essentially you're managing the same resource. So what we will be doing, and I think it's listed as one of the key items to be addressed, is how we achieve that. One of the likely things we may need to do is relook at what the existing groundwater limits or the new groundwater limits, what the implications are for that of those for geothermal sustainability long term. That may mean some additional reservoir modelling potentially, but also looking at, I think what you're touching on is how consistent do we need to be between allocating 25-degree non-geothermal water and 31-degree geothermal water. I think there are some discussions to be had around whether there are some opportunity to look at some permitted activity standards for low temperature geothermal use. I'm not sure there's agreement across the board internally on that yet. So we've got more discussions, but there's probably some opportunity to look at a more enabling pathway for small low temperature geothermal uses in some cases.
Councillor Shirley.
Thank you. My question is along a similar line to Councillor Crosby, and I'm very supportive of the separating the Rotorua system from the Tauranga low temperature geothermal, because as we appreciate, Rotorua is a active geothermal area engaged with the magma, whereas the Tauranga system is just residual heat from ancient volcanics long extinct, and is totally integrated with the freshwater groundwater. So why on earth do we need a separate management system? Why not just treat it as we would groundwater generally? Because I know there's a lot of irrigators, sort of Te Puna, right through Katikati, with avocados, kiwi fruit, using it for frost protection. They use it for irrigation, irrespective of the temperature. It doesn't make any difference to them. It's just another lens of the aquifer, and it's just a totally integrated system. So why not just draw the line and say that it's just groundwater with a bit of residual heat from ancient volcanics, and not worry about the geothermal management aspect, which we do in Rotorua for the right reasons, because it's engaged with active magma.
Oh, you just made me sit up in my chair and go, here's an argument. No, thank you for that question. I think maybe you're being a devil's advocate a little bit, but the heat. Oh,
You don't know this, boy.
So yeah. Oh, really? So I think there are a lot of people that do value that heat resource. It's an important resource. It's a renewable, low carbon source of energy, and the central government has recognised that and are pushing very, very hard for enabling frameworks for low temperature geothermal use. We accept that over time that residual heat will be lost over many hundreds of years. And so we have to accept that sustainability in that regard looks really different to how it does in Rotorua, where we're protecting geysers. But that if you can get 50-degree heat, which we can, and we just drilled a monitoring well of over 70 degrees, that's significant heat. That's got significant economic value, regardless of the cultural values associated with that, which are significant also. In Makatū and in other places throughout the region, the use of that low temperature taonga was very significant and is still valued to tangata whenua. And regardless of whether you put an economic hat on or a cultural hat on, the heat value is not just water, it is quite special. And we also, can I just add one more thing? Just in case that didn't convince you, the legislation also gives us quite clear direction that we have to sustainably manage natural and physical resources, and that includes the heat and energy value of geothermal resources. So we're statutorily obliged to look after this thing that is tauranga geothermal, noting, of course, that there are some, that as an integrated and connected resource, we have to look at how we do that in a sensible manner.
Whose private property rights is the sun? That's the question.
We can give it a crack if you'd like us to.
Tell the government that. Councillor MacDonald.
I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask the question, how sophisticated is the system? Devil's advocate, if I own a property, I choose not to tell you that I've got thermal activity because I don't want your interference or interruption in the use of the thermal on my property. So back to, again, how do you detect that?
So we have our resource consent. So we have a database which we know where wells have been drilled, and we know the data. So we know where we have warm spots, basically from drilling information, but also from our current live consents. We also have some monitoring wells and monitoring strategy where we're looking at where is the temperature and what's happening with that. Other than that, no, we don't know. So sometimes when people are drilling for groundwater, they may find geothermal heat when they don't want it. As Councillor mentioned before, they might just want it for irrigation. In other cases, with our monitoring wells that were recently drilled in Te Puke, we didn't expect to hit that high temperature, that shallow. So it's not an exact science. We got an idea, and we can do modelling to predict where we might find heat and at what temperature, but we can't say that exactly. And I guess just picking up on your point, because there is a different consenting framework for freshwater groundwater, say under 30 degrees, and for geothermal there is an inclination for reporting for people to come back and say that they have non-geothermal water, so 29 degrees versus 30. We're aware of that issue and we're looking at ways to address that, but there's a real perverse outcome from our consenting regime, which means people don't report geothermal as quickly as they might because they'd prefer to go for a permitted activity take than a full discretionary geothermal take under the current plan.
Any further questions? It's quite interesting because this is the topic that was used for our InStep young leaders when they had a go at being councillors for the morning. And so you can see it's quite an interesting one for them to have covered. And it was a good debate, wasn't it, on that one? Councillor Neves, did you have another question? No. Oh, you didn't. Okay. All right. So thank you for all of that feedback and for the report. And I think it is pretty clear. We do have recommendations, and that is that we do a little bit further engagement on the Māori values. And so can I have a mover and a seconder? Yeah. Councillor Crosby and Councillor White. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Awesome. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of today's meeting. So could I invite Councillor White to close us off with a karakia, please?
Ora, Madam Chair, kia tau ka tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou riki au kreiti, me te aroha te atua, me te whiwika tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amen.